Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about Reflex versus Relentless. Which is better for which situations, which one should you choose for your champions, etc, etc. So for starters, let's talk about what each set does. Starting with the Reflex set, it's a 4-piece set and it offers you a 40% chance to reduce the cooldown of a random skill. By contrast, the Relentless set is also a 4-piece set, but it gives you an 18% chance to grant an extra turn. Now the Reflex set comes from Ice Golem and the Relentless set comes from winning tournaments. However, technically both of them can be purchased from the shop from time to time when they offer gear packs, but I don't recommend doing that, particularly as a free-to-play player, but just in general, it's not usually worth the real money cost to buy gear from the shop. It's also worth mentioning that both of these sets kind of achieve the same goal of cycling your abilities more quickly. One does it by just reducing the cooldown when you start your turn, and the other does it by just giving you an extra turn, which effectively reduces the cooldowns of all abilities. So in order to help you decide which is better for your particular instance, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of using either of these sets. Starting with the Reflex set, some of the pros are that you just have a higher chance for it to activate. 18% for Relentless versus a 40% chance for Reflex. So this is nearly twice or over twice as likely to proc on any given turn. Another pro is that these were effectively buffed by the AI Overrides update a couple of years ago, such that you can turn off abilities and thus you can force the randomness of the skill cooldown reduction to target one skill in particular. However, aside from that, this set was already fairly strong on champions who have one active skill already. Reflex is also turn tune friendly, and what I mean by that is if you need your champions to take only a certain amount of turns, Reflex just reduces their cooldown such they get their abilities back more often, but they don't take any extra turns, which might throw something out of tune. Now for some of the cons. For Reflex, I will say that it is speed tune unfriendly in the sense that if you need your champions to do a certain thing at a certain time, such that a fight goes in a certain way, randomly reducing cooldowns is going to throw everything out of sync, so it may not be speed tune friendly if you're counting on the ability to be ready when it needs to be ready on such teams like a Helicath or a Maneater or a Demitha, teams like that for Demon Lord, for example. In the same vein, the effect is not guaranteed, so you cannot build a team assuming you're always going to get a Reflex proc because it is a 40% chance. Another con is that this is a 4-piece set, meaning you're sacrificing the potential to get some other set effects and or some stats just from 2-piece sets, like Perception, for example. And of course, the source is highly unpopular, that being Ice Golem, which is basically everyone's least favorite dungeon. I'm not sharing of that same opinion. I like Ice Golem, but that's primarily because I do like the Reflex set and I do want more pieces on my account. Now let's talk about Relentless. What are some of the pros for this? One of the main pros is that getting an extra turn reduces the cooldowns of all of your abilities at once, not just a single one at random. So even though the chance is less as far as it procs, it's reducing the cooldown effectively of all your skills at the same time. And of course, Relentless can proc multiple times, so you can take double, triple, quadruple turns sometimes and cycle really quickly through your abilities. With these two things in mind, this makes Relentless more effective overall for longer battles, just because again, you're reducing multiple cooldowns at the same time and just being able to do more in the same amount of time span relative to your other champions because you're getting a ton of extra turns. Now, as far as the cons go for Relentless, they're pretty much the same as Reflex in that they're not speed tune friendly. Again, if you're taking extra turns, you can easily throw your speed tune out of sync. If your Maneater takes extra turns, he's not going to put the unkillable up at the right time, etc, etc. The effect is, of course, also not guaranteed. It's only 18%. So if you're building a team comp that requires at least one Relentless proc to work, it may not work 100% of the time because you will not always get an extra turn. And again, you're sacrificing some potential stats because this is a 4-piece set with no stat bonus, like Perception or Stalwart or something else. And of course, the biggest con of all is the source being tournaments, which is definitely a pay-to-win way to get a gear set in the game, and it is extremely difficult to win tournaments. I don't win them very often, maybe a couple a month, and it's usually because I'm focusing on Classic Arena or tag team arena tournaments nowadays. But dungeon tournaments are ridiculously notorious for whales just going ham, and shard pull tournaments are even worse. So by now you've probably figured out that the answer, as usual, to these types of questions, Reflex versus Relentless, is it depends. However, there is a good rule of thumb that I like to use when trying to decide what's appropriate for my individual champions. If I really care about what they do on their A1, then I will opt more towards Relentless, because that's majority of the time they're going to be doing their A1s while they're reducing the cooldowns of the other skills, and thus you benefit from them taking extra turns. But if I don't really care about what they do on their A1, and I just simply want them to do more of what they do best without necessarily taking more A1s, then Reflex works just fine, because they're taking the same amount of turns, but they're getting their good abilities back more often. And again, it's a higher chance to proc, 40% versus 18, so you're more likely to get the cooldown reduction on the skills you care about. And if that's not a satisfactory enough answer for you, then stay tuned, because I'm going to walk you guys through all my champions who have these sets equipped and how I came to the conclusion I did on whether or not to use Reflex versus Relentless. So starting off again with the Reflex set, let's talk about Ugo, one of my favorite epics in the entire game. Now, Ugo could go either way. She's well known for the block debuffs, or block buffs and decreased defense on the A2, as well as the partial cleanse, and she has a leech on the A1. Now, the reason she can go either way, and I've definitely seen her in both ways, is that on the A1, having more leeches out there, like in cases of Hydra, for example, is not the worst thing in the world, because she can just place leech on more heads while also cycling back quickly to the block buffs ability. However, for my particular use case, I don't really care about her placing leech. It's not a 100% chance, even though it increases 5% for each alive enemy. And so I'd rather just have her go in a normal turn order and just have block buffs more often and more healing, cleansing more often. But I've definitely seen her built in Relentless sets, so you could go either way. Another benefit is what I talked about earlier, where taking extra turns can kind of run you out of sync with the rest of your team. So in the case of Hydra, where I use her primarily, I don't really want her running out of her buffs. If I place a shield on her, I don't want her taking 3 extra turns and running the shield out and then being targeted by heads she's not supposed to be targeted by. So I'd rather her stay in sync, stay under the shield in this example, and just reduce the cooldown of her A2. Up next, I have both of my Cold Hearts in Reflex sets for various purposes throughout the game, and this highlights the AI override change, where primarily when I come to the bosses in whatever stage I'm fighting, I tend to turn off her A2 and just have the Reflex set reduce the cooldown of Heartseeker, her heavy-hitting enemy max HP attack. So since it's a 40% chance to proc, on average, about every once in 3 turns you'll get it to proc 1 time, meaning that this is effectively about a 3-turn cooldown. The next 3 are more cookie cutter as far as applying the rule of thumb, and I will note that all of them are not currently in Reflex set, but my intention is to have them in Reflex sets by the time I finish farming some more Ice Golem. So those 3 are Rector Wrath, Mordecai, and Royal Guard. And so these fall into the same category of their A1s are not that important to me. Royal Guard places decreased defense, but generally speaking, I run him with a full AoE debuffer, so I don't really need him to take that. I just want more takedowns. For Mordecai, his A1 can reduce some turn meter on a single target, but again, generally speaking, if I want a turn meter reduction, I'd want it on an AoE and not just a single target, and I'm really more concerned with reducing the cooldown of his AoE HP burn. Similarly, for Rector Wrath, she has decreased attack on a single target on the A1. It's a decent chance to place it, but I don't even build her with accuracy, so she never places this anyways. And again, I just want her to reduce the cooldown of her A2 for more Veils and more healing. And last but not least, we have a representative Farrakhan the Fat, who's also in a Reflex set. He's definitely more of my Reflex mule, where he gets the extra pieces that I happen to have lying around, and I'm happy to steal from him if I get pieces that I need for other champions. But he highlights one of the more unique areas where a Reflex set can be very useful, which is ally attack champions. So depending on whether or not you need them to be in sync with some sort of speed tune, Reflex set is always good, because you can turn off, again, I can turn off the Brand of Shame ability on a boss, and I could just have him reduce the cooldown of the ally attack ability, effectively making this about a 3-turn cooldown versus a 4. So this could apply to any of the ally attack champions, Lanotharol, Lanicus the Chosen, etc. Insert favorite ally attacker there. All of them can benefit from running in a Reflex set. Now for the Relentless set, let's start with Ninja and Walking Tomb Drang because they're quite similar in what they do. They deal their damage primarily by placing and activating HP burns. And so in this case, Relentless is more useful because them taking extra turns means they get to activate more HP burns, which overall is more damage because you're lapping your opponents by not waiting for the HP burn ticks to proc on them. So champions like this who activate things typically are better off in Relentless because the extra turns help you stay ahead of the actual effect of the debuffs you are placing. I also have Mighty Uko in a Relentless set, and this is a case more like the rule of thumb where on his A1 it's an AoE that places decreased attack. So I don't necessarily want him in a Reflex set because I don't mind having more AoE decreased attacks. It's a 75% chance, so more often than not he's going to place that on all enemies. And at least on manual, since he has a conditional revive here, I can pick and choose when I use this, so most of the time he's not using this unless people are actually dead since it's on manual, and I'm just kind of spamming the A1 in between A2s. Shifting focus here now to champions who are famous for their A1 abilities, where I'm going to highlight Dark Kayle, Venomage, and Allure. Now, Dark Kayle on the A1 can activate poisons and HP burns, so having him, again similar to Ninja and Walking Tomb Drang in a Relentless set, gives him more chances to activate more poisons and burns prior to them proccing naturally on the enemies by waiting for them to take their turn. In a very, very similar vein, you have Venomage who can pop poisons on the A1, so same logic there. And Allure doesn't activate things, but she is very, very famous for her A1 where she can reduce a ton of turn meter. So again, her taking extra turns means that whoever she's reducing the turn meter for will have less turns overall. The next case is somewhat unique because following the rule of thumb, you would think I would have chosen a Reflex set, but I actually opted for Relentless, and that champion is Reliquary Tender. So we look at her skills, her A1 is next to useless because she has the weak version of decreased attack at a 50% clip, and I didn't build her with any accuracy, so she never lands that anyways. So you would think useless A1, I probably just want Reflex so I can get more cleanses and more revives. But I opted for Relentless, and the reason I did that is because she has no way to heal herself naturally. She's not in a regen set, she's just in a life set and Relentless, and so extra turns actually allows the continuous heals on herself to proc so she can heal herself up and thus be alive to keep cleansing and keep reviving others when they die. The next example is more cookie cutter, but it's a good comparison to Royal Guard and the differences between their kits, and that would be Husk. So similarly, of course, I want more enemy max HP damage from him, and so Relentless or Reflex could make sense, but I opted for Relentless because on the A1 he's able to provoke. So primarily this is useful in Hydra against the Head of Decay, so extra turns, given that this is only a 45% chance, gives me another try to try and provoke the Decay Head. I guess it's a 2-hitter, so slightly higher than 45%, but extra turns give me more chances to land the provoke on the Head of Decay while also reducing the cooldown of the AoE enemy max HP hit. And the last example here is Doom Priest, who is very popular in a Relentless set because of her passive, not because of her abilities, because she heals every turn and she removes one random debuff every turn. So having her take extra turns, contrary to Reflex, which wouldn't affect this passive at all, this is useful because she's just going to do more healing and more cleansing of random debuffs. So it makes sense to put her in a Relentless set. Now, of course, this is not an exhaustive list of all the champions you could use in Reflex or Relentless. Depending on who you have and how much gear you have, you can decide for yourself what's appropriate based on what I've shown you here today. Alrighty, so that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully you found this guide helpful as far as whether or not you want to use Reflex or Relentless on your respective champions, and if you found it helpful, then be sure to drop a like on this video down below. Now, this video was actually a suggestion by one of my clanmates, so shout out to him. So if you guys want any videos like this in the future, comparing different sets or some other topic in general, then leave a comment down below telling me what you'd like to see. And as always, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, then feel free to hit that subscribe button down below. We are very, very close to hitting 100 subs on the channel, and I'd very much like to get there, and I'd love your help to do so. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.